The 1917 revolution had a tragic impact on the fate of many Russian estates. The noble estates, which embodied beauty and luxury, became objects of plunder. The destruction of landowners' estates occurred in two waves. The first wave occurred immediately after the abdication of the Tsar. In fact, there was anarchy and agitation by various parties calling on the peasants to redistribute property. The ongoing World War I and the unresolved land issue led to growing arbitrariness and violence among the peasants in rural areas. Riots broke out, property were destroyed, and lands were seized. A significant portion of the noble estates in Russia, about 16,000, were burned and plundered by the peasants in the summer and autumn of 1917. Today we are at one of the estates that was destined to survive the first wave. This is the property of Earl Konstantin Karlovich Toll, who was the son of the famous general and participant in the Napoleonic Wars Karl Fyodorovich von Toll. The village of Fyodorovskoye was first mentioned in the 17th century and was listed as a sovereign village. Later, Emperor Peter I granted it, along with surrounding villages, to Field Marshal Prince Mikhail Mikhailovich Golitsyn for his victory over the Swedes during the Great Northern War 1700–1721. The formation of the estate complex began in the first half of the 19th century. At this time, a park was laid out on the estate and a wooden manor house was built with two wings. The remaining buildings were erected later. The park once featured a greenhouse and hotbeds where peaches, laurel trees, and other exotic plants thrived. A variety of tree and shrub species also flourished within the park's grounds. The estate once had approximately 3.5 hectares. In the mid-19th century, the village was passed as dowry to the husband of Golitsyn's daughter, Earl Konstantin Karlovich Toll. The main house is a structure of original architecture with one surviving crenellated tower with embrasures as a reminder of the knightly lineage of the owner. A beautiful driveway and tall arches lead to the house. A large fountain adorned with sculpture and flower beds was located in front of the main facade of the manor house. A wide esplanade led to the manor house from the country road. 3 residential outbuildings were located along it. In 1970, the manor in the village of Fyodorovskoye, like all noble estates, was nationalized. First, a poorhouse was established there, and then a disabled worker artel was housed there. Later, the manor house was transferred to the collective farm. In 1943, the manor house burned down and has not been restored since. In the 1960s, the surviving part of the building was used as a kindergarten. Currently, the estate is in private ownership. A guest house was planned to be built nearby, but everything suggests that any activity there has been absent for many years. The estate is included in the list of historical and cultural monuments of the Vladimir region. In the early 2000s, in accordance with the decree of the governor of the region, the old manor of Konstantin Karlovich Toll was included as a component part of the boundaries of the historical and landscape complex. Let's return to the events of the early 20th century. In November 1917, the Bolsheviks issued a decree on land, declaring it to be the property of the peasants. The new local authorities began dividing the land of the landowners among the peasants, and at the same time confiscated everything that was in the estates. They seized livestock and machinery, valuables, libraries, furniture. Art objects were either confiscated by the new authorities or plundered by the peasants. The estates themselves were often burned down. By the end of 1919, no more than a third of all estates remained. Those that were left were either abandoned and gradually falling into ruin, or were turned to social facilities such as schools, hospitals, libraries, and sanatoriums. Occasionally, revolutionary troops would stay at the estates, and then everything flammable they could find, furniture, doors, parquet, would be used as firewood. Metal from the roofs was used to make buckets, utensils, and so on. Libraries, after being confiscated, were either plundered along the way for smoking, kindling, packing, or later written off as belonging to a class enemy. For example, from 1918 to 1923, over 4,500 paintings, over 400 sculptures, and over 15,000 items of applied art were taken from the estates of landowners in the Moscow region. The second wave of minor destruction was initiated by a decree of the Central Executive Committee of the USSR on March 1925. Prior to this decree, landowners were allowed to remain at their estates in the districts with limitation on land use and prohibiting hired labor. However, in 1924, the Soviet government decided to confiscate all their property except the clothing, furniture, and utensils. Because the former landowners started to integrate into the Soviet government institution, they, using loopholes in the legislation of the young state, slowly began to reclaim their previously confiscated estate. The new decree permanently abolished landowner property, and former owners were subject to eviction from their estates. While the manors had their owners, they represented not just a lord's house, but also infrastructure and production facilities. After being transformed into state farms, these facilities practically stopped to function. The absence of a single owner resulted in a lack of proper care for the means of production, leading to their deterioration. The manors decayed and crumbled. Those few estates that survived the revolution were destined for slow degradation. Some were luckier than others. Across Russia, there are over 2,000 such dying architectural monuments. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, many of them were sold into private hands. One might expect that the appearance of an owner would breathe new life into these unique monuments. However, this didn't happen in most cases. The money and desire to restore the former glory of the estates never materialized in the period after Soviet Union's disintegration. As a result, the country is losing unique objects, each of which could have been a tourist attraction, bringing profit to both their owners and the state treasury. Currently, the Toll manor is in a critical condition. For a long time, the walls were dismantled for bricks, and the destruction was furthered by treasure seekers. Everyone is looking for hidden caches, specifically in the brickwork, ruthlessly smashing the old walls so that a collapse is now imminent. No one knows how much longer this unique structure will last. Well, we are concluding our exploration of the manor ruins, and now we plan to stroll along the main avenue of the old park, or what's left of it. The path through the park leads to the Seleksha river, from where an endless Russian expanse opens up, untouched since the time of Earl Toll himself.
Who brought my domain into such desolation? Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.